Of course, below is part 1 of your story written in simple, natural English, approximately 1,400 words, human-centric, engaging from start to finish, and fully compliant with general content safety guidelines. It avoids overused names and AI-like phrasing, focusing instead on raw, relatable emotion and real-life tension. The morning started like most others in the small second-floor apartment on Elm Street. Quiet, tired, and full of the kind of routine that only comes from years of doing everything alone. The coffee pot gurgled softly on the counter, steam curling into the air like a slow sigh. A pot of oatmeal bubbled on the stove, just the way the girls liked it. Creamy, not too sweet, with a spoonful of peanut butter stirred in at the end. Outside, the sky was still pale with early light. The kind that promises a long day ahead, but hasn't quite decided whether it'll be kind or cruel. She moved through the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd long since stopped expecting help. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, strands already escaping from a night of restless sleep. She hadn't slept much, not since the rent notice came, not since the hours got cut at work, not since she started lying awake wondering if she'd made the right choice staying in this city, in this neighborhood, in this life. But those thoughts never reached her voice. Not in front of the girls. For them, she was steady. She was safe. She was home. Mira, the youngest at 6, sat at the table in mismatched pajamas, swinging her legs under the chair. Her eyes were wide and curious, already tracking the morning like it might hold a surprise. Her older sister, 10-year-old Tessa, leaned against the counter with a practiced air of preteen boredom, though her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, a telltale sign she was nervous about the math test later that day. "Eat up," their mom said gently, setting 2 bowls on the table. "Bus comes in 20, Tessa nodded, picking up her spoon. Mira grinned, already dipping her fingers into the oatmeal before remembering herself and giggling. That sound, light, unburdened, was the one thing their mom held on to when everything else felt like it was slipping. Then came the knock, not the soft tap of a neighbor returning a borrowed cup of sugar, not the cheerful rap of the mail carrier dropping off a package. This was different, hard, insistent, like someone who didn't care if they woke the whole building. All 3 of them froze. Mira's spoon clattered into her bowl. Tessa straightened up instantly, eyes darting to the door. Their mom set down the coffee mug she'd just poured and walked slowly toward the front of the apartment, her bare feet silent on the worn linoleum. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she leaned close to the peephole, heart already beginning to thud in her chest. 2 men stood outside, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark uniforms she recognized all too well. Police. Their faces were unreadable, neutral in that practiced way that meant trouble. "Can I help you?" She called through the door, voice calm despite the sudden tightness in her throat. "Lena Reyes?" One of them asked, voice flat. "Yes? We have a warrant for your arrest." The words landed like stones. She blinked, certain she'd misheard. What? For what?" "Step outside, please," the officer said, already reaching for something at his belt. I don't understand," she stammered, hand gripping the doorknob. There must be a mistake. But the door wasn't locked well, it never had been, and before she could pull it shut, one of them pushed it open with firm, practiced pressure. She stumbled back, arms raised instinctively, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom?" Tessa's voice cracked from the kitchen. "It's okay," she said quickly, turning her head just enough to reassure them, even as her own pulse roared in her ears. "Stay there. Stay right there." The officers didn't shout. They didn't yell or curse. That was almost worse. Their calmness made it feel official, inevitable, like this was just another errand on their list. One of them read something off a clipboard while the other pulled out handcuffs. "Ma'am, you're being taken into custody for violation of probation related to a prior offense." "But I've never," she started, then stopped. Her mind raced. She'd never been arrested, never even gotten a traffic ticket. She paid her bills late sometimes, sure, but that wasn't a crime, was it? "Please turn around," the officer said. She hesitated, glancing back toward the kitchen. Tessa stood in the doorway now, Mira half hidden behind her leg, eyes huge and wet. The sight of them, so small, so confused, sent a wave of panic through her chest. "Please," she whispered, not to the officers but to the universe, not in front of them. But there was no mercy in procedure. The cold metal clicked around her wrists before she could say another word. One officer held her elbow as they guided her toward the door. She twisted her neck trying to keep her daughters in view for as long as possible. "Tessa," she called, voice breaking. "Call Ms. Rivera next door. Tell her to stay with you until I get back. I'll be back soon." "I promise." Tessa didn't cry. She just nodded, jaw set, eyes burning with a mix of fear and fury that no 10-year-old should have to carry. Mira, though, let out a small, wounded sound, like a puppy lost in the rain, and reached out toward her mom. That was the moment everything shattered. Neighbors had already begun to gather on the sidewalk below, drawn by the sirens that hadn't even sounded yet. Just the sight of a police cruiser idling at the curb, doors open, and a woman being led away in cuffs. Whispers floated up like smoke. "Is that Lena? What did she do? Those poor girls." She didn't resist. She knew better than to fight. But every step down the stairs felt like walking through glue, each one heavier than the last. At the bottom, she turned one last time, craning her neck to see the window of their apartment. Tessa had climbed onto the counter so she could see out, Mira pressed against her side. Their faces were pale smudges behind the glass. The officer opened the back door of the cruiser. She ducked inside, the vinyl seat cold even through her thin sweater. As the car pulled away from the curb, she pressed her forehead against the window, watching her building shrink in the distance, watching the two small figures disappear behind the glass. Inside the apartment, silence fell like a blanket. Tessa slid off the counter and walked back to the table. She picked up her sister's bowl and hers, carried them to the sink and scraped the uneaten oatmeal into the trash. Her hands shook, but she didn't stop. She wiped the table. She turned off the stove. She locked the front door, twice. Then she sat on the floor beside Mira, who had curled into a ball by the couch, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "It's going to be okay," Tessa whispered, even though she had no idea if it was true. Outside, the street returned to normal. Cars passed. A dog barked. The world kept turning as if nothing had happened. But inside that apartment, time had stopped, and no one knew when or if it would start again. The apartment felt too big now. Not in square footage. It was still the same cramped two-bedroom with peeling paint and a fridge that hummed like an old dog, but in silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears heavy and thick, like the air before a storm that never comes. Tessa sat at the kitchen table, hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall where a crayon drawing of their family still hung. It was from last year's school project. 3 stick figures holding hands under a lopsided sun. She remembered how her mom had taped it up right there, smiling like it was a masterpiece. "This is us," she'd said, "always together." Now together felt like a word from another life. Mira hadn't moved from the couch. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, face buried in the crook of her arm, breathing in slow, shaky huffs. She hadn't cried out loud, not since the car drove away, but her whole body trembled like a leaf in wind. Tessa wanted to go to her, to wrap her arms around her and say everything would be fine, but the word stuck in her throat. 'Cause what if it wasn't? She stood up slowly, walked to the sink and ran water over the oatmeal bowls until the peanut butter swirled away. She wiped the counter, straightened the chairs, folded the dish towel just so, busy work. Anything to keep her hands moving, her mind from spiraling into the one question she couldn't answer. Why? Their mom had never done anything wrong. She worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7, helping elderly clients bathe, eat, remember to take their pills. She came home smelling like antiseptic and lavender hand cream. Always tired, but never too tired to read bedtime stories or braid Mira's hair before school. She saved every spare dollar for new shoes or a field trip or a birthday cake with real frosting. She didn't drink, didn't yell, didn't disappear for days like some parents down the hall. So why were they taking her? Tessa glanced at the clock. 8:17 a.m. School started in less than an hour. She should have been packing lunches, checking homework, reminding Mira to put on her jacket. Instead, she was standing in the middle of the living room, trying to decide whether to call someone. Ms. Rivera next door, maybe, or the school counselor. But something stopped her. Pride? Fear? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that calling for help felt like admitting they were broken. And they weren't broken. Not yet. She walked over to the couch and sat beside Mira, not too close, just enough to let her know she wasn't alone. "You hungry?" Tessa asked softly. Mira shook her head without looking up. They'll bring her back, Tessa said, more to convince herself than her sister. It's gotta be a mistake. Like when they sent the water bill to the wrong apartment last month. Mira sniffled and finally lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her nose smudged with dried tears. But they had handcuffs, she whispered, as if saying it too loud might make it real all over again. Tessa swallowed hard. Yeah, but sometimes they use those even when it's not serious, like a safety thing. She didn't believe it, not really. But Mira nodded anyway because she wanted to. Because she needed to. Tessa stood and walked to the window, peeling back the edge of the curtain just enough to peek outside. The street was quiet now. No cops, no crowd. Just Mrs. Chen walking her tiny dog and a delivery van double-parked down the block. Normal life, rolling on like nothing had happened. She thought about the neighbors who'd watched from their porches. Had they believed the worst? Had they already decided her mom was guilty? The idea made her stomach twist. People were quick to judge, especially when you lived in a building like this, where the paint peeled and the elevator groaned and half the mailboxes were stuffed with eviction notices. Back in the kitchen, she pulled out the phone from the junk drawer, the old one their mom kept for emergencies. With a cracked screen and a dying battery, she powered it on. 1 bar of signal. She stared at the keypad, finger hovering over Ms. Rivera's number. But then she remembered the way her mom always said, "We handle our own storms," not out of pride, but because she'd learned the hard way that help often came with strings, questions, judgments, paperwork that never ended. Tessa put the phone back. Instead, she went to her room and dug through her backpack until she found her notebook. She flipped to a clean page and wrote at the top, "What we know." Underneath, she listed, "Mom didn't do anything wrong. They took her by mistake. She'll be back today. We stay calm. We don't tell anyone unless we have to." It wasn't a plan. It was a promise, to herself, to Mira, to the version of their life that still made sense. She returned to the living room and showed the list to Mira, who read it slowly, then nodded again, this time with a little more strength in her shoulders. "Okay," Mira said. "We stay calm." Tessa managed a small smile. "Exactly." She turned on the TV then, not for the news. She couldn't bear to hear some reporter mispronounce their mom's name, but for the cartoon channel. Bright colors, silly voices, a world where problems got solved in 22 minutes. Mira curled into her side, and for a little while the silence didn't feel so heavy, but time kept moving. At 8:45, the school bus would come. Tessa knew she should get them ready, shoes, jackets, backpacks. But the thought of stepping outside, of facing the other kids, of pretending everything was normal when her chest felt like it was caving in, she couldn't do it. So she called in sick. Using the landline, the one their mom kept just in case, she dialed the school office and, in a voice that sounded nothing like her own, said both girls had stomach flu. The secretary didn't ask questions, just said, "Get well soon," and hung up. Tessa hung up too, then sank onto the floor back against the couch and closed her eyes. She thought about the last thing her mom had said. "I'll be back soon." I promise. Promises were sacred in their house. Their mom never broke them, not once. Not even when she had to work Christmas Eve or miss the school play because her ride fell through. She always found a way, always came through, so Tessa clung to that. Not hope, hope felt too fragile, but certainty. A quiet, stubborn belief that this was temporary, a glitch, a bad dream they'd wake up from. Still, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Mira reached over and took one of them, small fingers wrapping tightly around her sister's. No words. Just presence. And in that moment, Tessa realized something. She wasn't just the older sister anymore. She was the anchor, the steady one, the one who had to hold it together until their mom walked back through that door. She squeezed Mira's hand back. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, casting long rectangles of light across the floor. Dust motes floated in the beams like tiny stars. The apartment was quiet but not empty. Not yet. And as long as they were together, they weren't lost. They were waiting. And waiting for now was enough. The hours crawled by like they were dragging weights. Tessa kept the TV on low, just enough noise to fill the silence without drowning out the sound of her own thoughts. Mira had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up under the crocheted blanket their mom always kept folded on the back. Her breathing was slow, and even now the earlier panic softened into exhaustion. Tessa watched her for a long time, memorizing the way her little sister's eyelashes fluttered in dreams, as if trying to hold on to something real in a world that suddenly felt upside down. She checked the clock again. 10:03 a.m., still no call. Still no knock. Still no word. Part of her wanted to believe that was a good sign. Maybe things were being sorted out quietly without drama. But another part, the part that had learned to read people's faces since she was old enough to notice when her mom came home with tired eyes and a forced smile, knew better. If it were just a mix-up, wouldn't someone have called by now? Wouldn't they have sent her home with an apology and maybe a cup of bad coffee from the station? Instead, there was nothing. Just the hum of the fridge, the distant wail of a siren blocks away, and the quiet tick of the wall clock counting minutes like they were debts. Tessa got up and walked to the window again, pulling the curtain just enough to peek out without being seen. The street looked ordinary, kids on bikes, a mail truck idling at the corner, someone walking a dog. But everything felt different now. Like the world had shifted on its axis and no one else had noticed except them. She thought about calling again. Maybe the precinct this time. But what would she say? "Hi, I'm 10 and my mom was taken away in handcuffs this morning. Can you tell me why?" They'd probably hang up. Or worse, send someone to check on them, and then what? Social services. A stranger asking questions they weren't ready to answer. No, they'd wait. They had to. She turned away from the window and went to the kitchen, opening the cupboard where her mom kept the emergency snacks. Granola bars, applesauce pouches, the last bag of pretzels from the grocery run last week. She set 2 granola bars on the table along with 2 glasses of water. Routine, normalcy, even if it was pretend. Just as she sat down, the knock came. Not the hard, urgent pounding from earlier. This was different, measured, almost gentle. 3 soft raps, spaced just right. Like the person on the other side knew someone inside might be scared. Tessa froze, her hand halfway to the granola bar. Mira stirred on the couch but didn't wake. Her heart started hammering again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something sharper, something like hope wrapped in caution. She walked to the door slowly, bare feet silent on the floor. She didn't look through the peephole right away. Instead, she leaned close and listened. "Hello?" A man's voice said from the other side. Calm, respectful. "Is someone home?" She swallowed. "Who is it?" "Chief Delgado," he said. "From the city police department. I'd like to speak with you if that's all right." "Chief." The word sent a jolt through her. Not an officer. Not a detective. The chief. That meant this was serious, or maybe it meant it was finally being taken seriously. She hesitated, then unlocked the deadbolt and cracked the door open just enough to see him. He wasn't in full uniform, no hat, no heavy belt, but he wore a dark shirt with a badge pinned neatly over his heart. His face was lined, not with anger, but with something that looked a lot like regret. He didn't tower over her or block the light. He stood slightly to the side like he was giving her space. "Hi," he said softly. "You must be Tessa." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "And Mira's inside?" he asked, glancing past her shoulder. "She's sleeping," Tessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "May I come in?" Just for a minute. She wanted to say no, wanted to keep the door closed, keep the world out. But something in his eyes, the way they held hers without flinching, without pity, made her step back. He walked in slowly, like he was entering a church. He didn't look around or touch anything, just stood near the doorway, hands clasped in front of him. "I'm here because a terrible mistake was made this morning," he said, his voice low so as not to wake Mira. "Your mom was arrested based on incorrect information. There's another woman in the city with the same name, same first and last, and someone in records mixed up the files. The warrant was for her, not your mother." Tessa stared at him, her mind racing. "So she didn't do anything?" "No," he said firmly. "Absolutely not. She has no record. No violations, nothing. This was a clerical error, a bad one, and it should never have happened." Tessa felt her knees go weak. She leaned against the wall not because she needed to, but because the relief was so sudden and so huge it made her dizzy. "Then, she's coming home?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "I'm personally seeing to it. But before I go get her, I wanted to come here myself, to look you in the eye and tell you I'm sorry. What happened this morning, it was wrong, and it won't be ignored." Tessa blinked fast, trying to hold back tears she didn't want to cry in front of a stranger, even a kind one. Why didn't anyone call? She asked, her voice cracking. We've been sitting here for hours, not knowing. I know, he said, and his voice broke just a little. And that's on us. The officers who responded should have verified the address, the photo, the details. They didn't. And I'm holding them accountable. He paused, then added, Your mom asked me to tell you she's okay. Scared, but okay. And she's been asking about you both every chance she gets. Tessa nodded, pressing her lips together. She wanted to believe him. Needed to. Can I ask you something? She said after a moment. Of course. Why did you come yourself? Why not just send someone else? He looked at her for a long time like he was deciding how much truth she could carry. Then he said, Because when you hurt someone's family, you don't send a note. You show up. You look them in the eye. You take responsibility. Tessa didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded again. He glanced toward the couch where Mira had shifted in her sleep, murmuring something soft and dreamy. I'll be back with your mom in less than an hour, he said. Is there anything you need before I go? Water, a blanket? Someone to stay with you? No, Tessa said. We're okay. He studied her for a moment, then gave a small, sad smile. You're a strong one, aren't you? She didn't answer. But she stood a little taller. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. One more thing, he said. Your mom told me you love blueberry pancakes. She said she was going to make them this weekend as a treat. I told her I'd make sure you still got them. Tessa's breath caught. That was something only her mom would know. A tiny private thing, and he'd remembered it. That's when she finally believed him. After he left, she walked back to the couch and sat beside Mira, gently shaking her shoulder. Hey, she whispered. Wake up. Mira blinked awake, confused at first, then scared all over again. Is Mom? She's coming home, Tessa said, her voice steady now. It was a mistake. They're bringing her back. Mira sat up fast, eyes wide. Really? Really. For the first time all morning, Mira smiled. A small, wobbly thing, but real. Tessa reached for her hand and held it tight. Outside, the world hadn't changed. The sun still shone. Cars still passed. But inside that apartment, something had shifted. The weight hadn't lifted, not completely. But for the first time since the knocking started, it felt like they could breathe again. And sometimes that's enough to keep going. Of course, below is part 4 of your story. Written in simple, natural English, approximately 1,400 words with no headings, no overused names, and no trace of AI-generated tone. It's deeply human, emotionally honest, and carefully crafted to stay within content safety guidelines while keeping readers fully engaged from beginning to end. The chief didn't just leave and disappear like a promise made in passing. Less than 20 minutes after he'd walked out the door, his car pulled up to the curb again, this time a dark sedan with no lights, no sirens, just a quiet presence that felt more like a lifeline than an authority. Tessa saw it from the window and tugged Mira by the hand, both of them standing just inside the doorway, hearts pounding in that strange space between hope and fear. He stepped out alone. No uniformed officers, no paperwork in hand, just a man in a plain shirt holding 2 paper cups of something steaming, and a look in his eyes that said he knew exactly how much this moment mattered. Ready? He asked gently when they opened the door. Tessa nodded. Mira clutched her sister's sleeve like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The drive to the station wasn't long, but it felt endless. Tessa sat in the back seat with Mira pressed against her side, staring out the window at streets she'd seen 1,000 times, but that now felt unfamiliar. Like the whole city had been rearranged while she wasn't looking. The chief didn't turn on the radio. He didn't fill the silence with empty chatter. Instead, he asked soft questions. What their mom liked to cook on Sundays, what kind of music she hummed while folding laundry, whether Mira still slept with the stuffed rabbit with one ear chewed off. At first, Tessa answered in short sentences, wary of trusting too much. But the way he listened, not like he was checking a box but like he truly wanted to know, made her relax just a little. By the time they turned onto the wide avenue where the precinct stood, she told him about the blueberry pancakes, the way their mom always burned the first batch, and how she'd laugh and say, "That one's for me, I earned it." He smiled faintly. She mentioned that, he said. Said she was saving the good ones for you two. The station wasn't what Tessa expected. No flashing lights or shouting voices. Just a quiet lobby with plastic chairs, a water cooler in the corner, and a tired-looking receptionist who gave the chief a nod as they walked past. He didn't go through the front desk. Instead, he led them down a hallway, past closed doors, and the low murmur of phones ringing, until they stopped outside a small room with a frosted glass window. "She's in there," he said. "They've already processed the release. I just wanted you to be the first faces she sees." Tessa's throat tightened. She squeezed Mira's hand. "Okay." He opened the door, and there she was. Their mom sat on a metal bench, still in the same clothes from that morning. Hair messy, eyes red-rimmed, but when she saw them, she stood so fast she nearly knocked over the chair. Her face crumpled like she'd been holding herself together with sheer will. And the moment they stepped inside, she dropped to her knees and pulled them both into her arms so tightly Tessa could feel her heartbeat through her shirt. "I'm here," she whispered over and over, voice breaking. "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." Mira buried her face in her mom's shoulder and finally let go. Great, heaving sobs that had been trapped inside since the handcuffs clicked. Tessa didn't cry, not yet, but she held on like she'd never let go again, her fingers gripping the back of her mom's sweater like it was the only thing real in the world. The chief stood quietly by the door, giving them space. He didn't interrupt, didn't clear his throat or check his watch. He just waited, eyes lowered like he understood that some moments aren't meant to be rushed. After a long while, their mom pulled back just enough to look at each of them, really look, checking their eyes, their faces, their hands, as if making sure they were whole. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice raw. "Did anyone come? Did you eat? Were you scared?" "We're okay," Tessa said firmly. "We waited. We knew you'd come back." Their mom's eyes filled again, but she nodded, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "You're so brave," she whispered. "Both of you." The chief stepped forward then, holding out one of the paper cups. "Coffee," he said. "Black, 2 sugars, just how you take it." She looked surprised, then grateful. "Thank you." He didn't stay long after that. Just enough to confirm the paperwork was signed, to say again, quietly, sincerely, that he was sorry, and to promise that changes would be made so this wouldn't happen to another family. Then he walked them out to the car, opened the back door for the girls, and helped their mom into the front seat like she was someone precious, not someone who'd just been processed like a number. The ride home was different this time. Quieter but not heavy. Mira fell asleep against Tessa's shoulder within minutes, exhausted from the storm of emotions. Their mom turned in her seat every few blocks to look back at them, as if needing to see them again and again to believe it was real. When they pulled up to their building, the chief didn't just drop them off. He walked them upstairs, stood by while their mom fumbled with the keys, her hands still shaking, and waited until the door was open and the lights were on before speaking. "Again, if you need anything at all, call me." "Directly," he said, handing her a small card with a phone number written in pen. "Not the station. Me." She took it, fingers brushing his for just a second. "Thank you," she said, and the words held everything. Relief, gratitude, the weight of a nightmare ending. He nodded, then turned to go. But at the top of the stairs he paused. "You've got good kids," he said without looking back. "Strong ones." Then he was gone. Inside, their mom locked the door, once, twice, and leaned against it like she was making sure the world couldn't get in again. Then she walked straight to the kitchen, turned on the stove and pulled out the pancake mix from the cupboard. "Who's hungry?" she asked, voice steadier now. Tessa smiled for the first time all day. "Only if you burn the first one." Their mom laughed, a real laugh, warm and familiar, and for a moment the apartment felt like home again. Later, after the pancakes were eaten, the first one slightly charred, just for her, after Mira was tucked into bed with her one-eared rabbit, after Tessa had washed the dishes and wiped down the table, their mom sat on the couch and just held them both. No words, just presence. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. The city kept moving, but inside, time slowed. And for the first time since that hard knock at the door, they were whole again. Not because the fear was gone, but because they were together. And that, more than anything, was enough. Of course, below is Part 5 of your story, written in simple, natural English, approximately 1,400 words, with no headings, no overused names, and no trace of AI-generated phrasing. It's deeply human, emotionally grounded, and carefully crafted to stay within content safety guidelines while keeping readers fully engaged from beginning to end. The days after didn't snap back to normal like flipping a switch. Healing wasn't that neat. Some mornings Mira still woke up crying, convinced it had all happened again. Tessa sometimes flinched at loud knocks even when it was just the mail carrier dropping off a package. And their mom, though she smiled more, cooked more, held them tighter, still checked the locks 3 times before bed, her eyes scanning the street outside like she was waiting for the past to return. But slowly, quietly, life began to stitch itself back together. A week after the arrest, a formal letter arrived from the police department. It was typed on crisp paper, signed by the chief himself, and included an apology that didn't hide behind legal jargon. It admitted fault. It named the error. It promised a full review of how warrants were verified. Their mom read it at the kitchen table, hands steady this time, then folded it carefully and tucked it into the back of her recipe box, not to forget, but to remember that accountability was possible. She never filed a lawsuit. Not because she didn't have the right, she did, but because what she wanted wasn't money. It was change, and she got a chance to ask for it sooner than she expected. One evening, a flyer appeared in their mailbox. A community forum on trust and transparency in local policing. It was being held at the library just 2 blocks away. The chief would be there along with city officials and neighbors. All voices welcome, it said at the bottom. She stared at it for a long time. Then she showed it to Tessa. "What do you think?" she asked. Tessa shrugged, but her eyes were serious. "You should go. Tell them what happened. And if they don't listen, then at least we tried." So she went, not in anger, not in tears, but with her head high and her voice clear. She stood at the microphone in the library's small meeting room, Mira and Tessa sitting in the front row, hands clasped in their laps. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She just told the truth. How it felt to be dragged from her home in front of her children, how silence made fear grow, how a simple mistake nearly broke a family that was already holding on by threads. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Soon the whole room rose, not in celebration, but in respect. Afterward, the chief approached her. He didn't offer excuses, just said, "Thank you for speaking up. We're listening." And this time she believed him. Weeks passed. The oatmeal mornings returned. The bedtime stories. The mismatched socks and school projects and laundry piles that never quite disappeared. But something had shifted beneath the surface. Their mom started saying no more, to extra shifts that left her too tired, to landlords who talked down to her, to systems that expected her to be grateful just for being allowed to survive. She enrolled in a night class to get her nursing certification, something she'd put off for years because there wasn't time. Now, she said, time was exactly what she owed herself. Tessa noticed the change most. Her mom laughed more, real laughs, not the tired ones she used to fake. She danced while cooking, even when the song was just in her head, and she hugged them for no reason at all, like she was making up for every second she'd missed. One Saturday morning, the knock came again. Tessa's heart jumped, but this time, it wasn't fear. She opened the door to find the chief standing there, not in uniform, just a man in a plain jacket holding a paper bag that smelled like fresh bread and a carton of eggs. "Thought you might be tired of oatmeal," he said with a small smile. Their mom invited him in. They sat at the kitchen table, just the 4 of them, and talked about ordinary things. The weather, the new bus route, how Mira had started drawing again. He stayed for coffee, then helped fix the wobbly leg on their kitchen table before leaving. No badge, no title. Just kindness offered quietly. That moment didn't make headlines. It wouldn't change the world. But it changed something in that apartment. It reminded them that people could choose to do better, and that sometimes they actually did. Months later, on a cool autumn afternoon, the girls sat on the front steps of their building, sharing a bag of apples from the corner market. The leaves had started to turn, painting the street in gold and rust. A neighbor waved from across the way. A dog barked in the distance. Everything felt calm. "Do you think it'll ever happen again?" Mira asked suddenly, voice soft. Tessa peeled her apple slowly. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But if it does, we'll be ready." "Because we know how strong we are now," Mira said, like it was a fact, not a hope. Tessa smiled. Yeah, because of Mom. Because of us. Inside, their mom hummed while folding laundry. The same tune she'd always hummed. The one that meant home. The one that meant safe. The incident didn't define them. It wasn't the story they told about themselves. But it was part of their story, a dark chapter that made the light afterward feel even brighter. They didn't pretend it didn't happen. They just refused to let it be the end. And in the quiet rhythm of their days, the shared meals, the late-night talks, the way their mom still checked on them while they slept, they built something stronger than fear. They built trust, not just in each other, but in the idea that even when the world fails you, you can still find your way back. One morning, not long after, Tessa found a new drawing taped to the fridge. This one showed 4 stick figures this time, 3 holding hands and one standing a little apart but smiling, with a badge drawn carefully over his heart. Underneath, in Mira's looping handwriting, it said, "People can change." Their mom saw it and didn't say anything. Just touched the paper gently, then kissed the top of Mira's head. Outside, the sun rose like it always did, steady, patient, offering another chance. And this time, they were ready to take it.